Okay, good.
Okay, so today we have with us Dr. Sarah Miller. Dr. Miller received her Bachelor of Science in Animal Biology and her Master's and PhD degrees in Animal Breeding and Genetics, all at the University of Guelph. Her Master's and PhD studies focused on genetic evaluations in Canadian dairy cattle. And Dr. Miller has been working for the dairy cattle AI industry since 2011 and is currently working at Semex in Guelph as the senior genomics research scientist, where her main focus has been on improvement of dairy bull fertility. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Miller. I'll give the floor over to you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you everybody for coming to this CGIL seminar to hear about some of the research that I've been performing at Semex in the last little while. So as mentioned, I've been working for Semex for a number of years. I had to look it up this morning because it's been a long time actually, since 2015. And yeah, it's been fun and very interesting to work in the industry, to work at research that's going to be, immediately applicable is quite a different from kind of academic-based research, but it's been great. I've been performing a lot of research that's fertility centric because there's been a new or a relatively newer initiative at Semex, the Fertility First kind of initiative that had started around in 2017 or 2018. So a lot of my research is kind of under that umbrella. And before I get into my actual topic, I thought it'd be interesting for any newer students or anybody maybe not as familiar with the dairy cattle industry to talk just for a few slides about Semex as a company, what we do, and what we have to offer. Just going to the next slide eventually. So Semex has a variety of different models that we adhere to that drive our decision making. It's a proudly Canadian company that's been put together by farmers and is farmer driven as well. A lot of our initiatives are working toward sustainability in the dairy cattle industry and being socially responsible, which I'll touch a little bit more on in the next slide when I introduce a couple of the different products and solutions that we have to offer. So I can't fit everything that Semex does onto one slide, but I decided to take some highlights. So people might recognize the Immunity Plus logo here. So Immunity Plus is based off of 30 years worth of research at the University of Guelph under Bonnie Millard's group. And so Semex brands animals as Immunity Plus animals. And this indicates that the Immunity Plus animals have lower antibiotic use with greater disease resistance. And any female dairy cattle that have been branded Immunity Plus provide higher quality colostrum to subsequently result in calves that have fewer health issues. And along the same vein of sustainability in the dairy cattle industry, Semex has been working in collaboration for the last little while with Lactanet Canada toward creating a new methane efficiency index, which just became available this month for the April 2023 proof round. So it's the first official methane efficiency genetic evaluation for the Holstein breed. And it works towards decreasing methane emissions in the dairy cattle industry by 20% by the year 2050. And there's various different brands as well that Semex provides, including Fertility First brand, for example. So that's one that's near and dear to my heart, so I have it on this slide. So any bull semen that is branded Fertility First essentially indicates to any producers wanting to buy this semen that the bull has been proven in the field to be better than average for fertility, and producers purchasing the semen can rest assured that the semen that they're using on their females in their herd that are branded Fertility First will have a boost in fertility in their herd. But Semex not only sells genetic materials such as semen, they also sell embryos. So Semex is one of the only genetic companies that has a fully integrated embryology laboratory that focuses on embryo freezing, in vitro fertilization, and genomics. And we've got a good team of researchers in that field as well. And not only that, but Semex also does a lot of work on developing solutions for producers to use. So we have a very good solutions team at Semex that works to develop these solutions. So I've got a few examples in the middle of the slide. So some solutions include Semex Works, Optimate, and Elevate. These solutions often come with on-farm applications so that producers can use these apps to help them make genetic decisions, mating decisions, decisions on which of their females to genetically test, and often makes this genetic testing of their females easier and more efficient as well. So that's a big spiel on some of the stuff that we do. We're a Canadian company. Semex Canada was the original company, but in 1997, Semex Canada combined with 3 different AI Canadian companies, including WestGen, EastGen, and CIAQ, to form the Semex Alliance. So that's what we're known as today. And EastGen is actually located very close to Semex Global headquarters. This is a rundown of our history from as far back as the 1950s, when frozen semen was first commercialized, all the way until this year in 2023, when we became first to market with methane efficiency index when collaborating with Lactanet. So that we have methane efficiency available on bulls as well as females that have been tested through Elevate. So that's a very exciting, timeline of accomplishments for Semex. A good chunk of our revenue comes from the sale and export of doses of semen mainly for the dairy cattle industry, with a good portion of our client base being based in the US and Canada, followed by various other countries. So we are a Canadian company, but we have various subsidiaries and across the globe, and various clientele across the globe as well. And coming back full circle to the concept of Fertility First. So we have our Fertility First brand, but we also have our Fertility First initiative, which originally formed to work toward improving fertility by improving efficiency and quality of all processes from the moment the bulls arrive in our isolation facility at a very young age to the moment that the semen is being used by the producer on farm. So there's various research as well as communications that go out in order to improve the fertility of our products. And again, a lot of my research is under this initiative, including the topic of today's presentation. So I'm going to get into that right now. So the topic of today's presentation is scrotal circumference in our dairy cattle population, in Semex's dairy cattle population, I should specify. A lot of research has been done in the past on scrotal circumference, but we need to be able to kind of hash out how this trait works within our particular company's population of dairy bulls and how it relates to various different fertility-related semen parameters. So a lot of work was done initially on various different semen quality traits. And I found that scrotal circumference was associated with various different semen quality traits that are associated with fertility. But the most interesting and strongest association that I had found was with semen production, so actual sperm count or sperm output, which is important to the company because any AI stud is going to want to improve the efficiency with which our bulls produce semen because, of course, a lot of our bulls are in high demand, and we want to be able to provide all of our clientele with the semen that they're asking for. So the first question that I had, or the first objective was, is this a useful trait in terms of being able to relate it to semen quality and semen production parameters in bulls that are large versus small for scrotal circumference? And if I found that it is a relevant trait within the Semex population of dairy bulls, can I then develop a genomic evaluation and use that genomic evaluation to predict early on, as early as possible, which bulls will end up large or small for scrotal circumference and subsequently better producers for semen. So touching on that first objective, just seeing what the association between scrotal circumference and semen production is, and actually quantifying that in terms of how many doses of semen can be produced in one group versus the other. I wanted to form a group of validation bulls that are the youngest bulls in our data set, that have genotypes, that have scrotal circumference measures, and then enough data after they arrive in our production facilities for semen collection in order to check and see what their semen production is like. So the first task after creating this list of validation bulls, so there's 286 bulls, most of which are Holsteins, some of which are Jerseys. We had other breeds as well, but there were too few to really include in this group of bulls. My first task was to take this group of bulls and look phenotypically to see which ones were small for scrotal circumference, which ones were large for scrotal circumference, and check to see what the differences for semen production were for these bulls. So I needed to categorize them phenotypically first. In order to do that, I needed to compare all of their scrotal circumference records to targets for scrotal circumference growth, which were developed based on what we see in Semex's population of dairy bulls, so for Holsteins and Jerseys. And if a bull is consistently over target for his growth, then he ends up being labeled as large for scrotal circumference, and vice versa for bulls that would end up being categorized as small for scrotal circumference. And the result of that, gave us a group of large bulls and a group of small bulls. And this figure here is just to illustrate what those bulls look like relative to target growth. So from about 6 months of age and on the x-axis here, you can see that large bulls are almost consistently 2.5 centimeters above target growth, and small bulls are almost consistently about 2.5 centimeters below target growth. And the next step is then to take that group of large versus that group of small bulls and then check to see what their semen production looks like in our population. There's a little bit of a problem there, though, because our group of validation bulls is relatively small. We have 286 bulls in that group, and not all of them are going to be labeled large or small. Actually, a good deal of them inherently are going to be labeled as average, of course. And with a smaller set of bulls as large and small, and the fact that they're not all collected at exactly the same ages and exactly the same seasons, I needed to be able to compare apples to apples, essentially. So what we have on the left is what the sperm count looks like in our population of Holstein and Jersey bulls from 12 months and on. And I wanted to be able to compare large versus small scrotal circumference bulls for their sperm count, independent of age and independent of other major factors, with the foremost, most influential factor being year season of semen collection. So that we end up with a figure that on the right here, where we've got the sperm count residuals, and checking to see what the relative difference in those residuals are between the large and small scrotal circumference bulls. So looking at actual numbers of bulls making it into these categories, we had 71 and 80 bulls being classified phenotypically, again, as large for scrotal circumference or small for scrotal circumference, respectively. And most of these bulls had sperm count data available. And again, I'm looking at sperm count independent of age within breed and independent of year season. So I'm looking at the residuals and comparing those residuals with a Welch's t-test to see what the difference in production is. And we know from literature that larger scrotal circumference is associated with greater semen production or sperm output, but we needed to quantify by how much in our population and what does that equate to in terms of draws of semen specifically. So with that comparison, I had found that large scrotal circumference bulls produced around 1,400 times 10 to the power of 6 more sperm cells on their first ejaculate, plus an extra 360 million more sperm cells on their second ejaculate. It was very difficult to be able to compare literal straws of semen produced in one group versus the other over the course of the first year of their lives, because there's a lot of different factors that are completely independent of the bull that might tweak their collection schedule at any given week. And I wanted to do a fair, a fair kind of comparison, and couldn't necessarily account for all of those factors that changed their collection schedules. So instead, what I had done was simulate a very conservative weekly semen collection schedule for these large versus these small scrotal circumference bulls, assuming a reasonable sperm straw concentration of 20 million sperm cells per dose of semen or per straw of semen. So that I could calculate that theoretically large scrotal circumference bulls would produce around 8,000 more straws of semen relative to small scrotal circumference bulls over the first year of semen collection. And that's just per bull. And when you're looking at multiple bulls, this is really going to add up, and large bulls are really having a large scrotal circumference bulls in our lineup is really going to improve efficiency of semen production within the company, which is always desirable. So that first objective is confirming that this is a trait that that is important to the company as a whole. So now can we evaluate this trait genetically and genomically, and then subsequently, can we use that genomic evaluation to be able to predict which bulls will end up being large for scrotal circumference or small for scrotal circumference, and subsequently higher producers versus lower producers for semen. So this is a breakdown of the data that I had available to me. We had in our database scrotal circumference records of around about 8,000 from 2017 to present day on a little over 2,000 bulls. The figure here on the bottom left indicates the distribution of scrotal circumference records by age. So before 12 months of age, these bulls are in our isolation facility, where we ensure that they're in top physical condition and that they are ready for semen production when they turn 12 months of age. And if they are, they end up in our semen production facilities, such as the one in Guelph, where they're collected for semen. So you can see that the majority of our records are coming from that isolation facility, most of which are collected between 6 months of age and around 9 months of age. And the figure on the right is just showing the change in scrotal circumference by age and illustrating the fact that this is a trait that can be reasonably modeled with a third order polynomial regression. So it's the breakdown of the different effects included in the model, including that third order polynomial on age within breed. There was also a fixed year season and a fixed birth year effect, as well as, of course, additive genetic and permanent environmental effects included as well, because these bulls can be measured several times. And a single-step genomic evaluation was performed, and this was performed first without any phenotypic records on our validation bulls, again, the 286 validation bulls, and second, including that first collected scrotal circumference record on our validation bulls to determine how the accuracy with which we can properly identify large versus small scrotal circumference bulls increases when we include that first record. This slide here is just to illustrate that the model was performing as we expected, with estimated scrotal circumference being strongly correlated with actual measures and our distribution of residuals acting as we would anticipate it should. And with respect to variance components, our scrotal circumference evaluation showed that the trait internally within Semex had a heritability of 0.4, which is a moderate heritability. I had done a quick literature study as well to find that it does range by quite a bit between about 0.36 and 0.71 in what I had found. So it's a bit on the lower end, but it's still a moderately heritable trait. And there's a couple of different reasons why it could be on the lower end. One glaringly obvious one is that these bulls are being measured at potentially as young as 4 months of age. And it's really difficult to get that consistent scrotal circumference record being measured on such young bulls. It's very difficult to measure the scrotum of these young bulls for various reasons. But also, these bulls aren't all necessarily coming from our internal program. We may be actually purchasing them from outside sources, and we can't necessarily track how these bulls are being treated within those farms. So if we've got several bulls coming from farm A and we don't know how any one of those bulls might be getting treated relative to other bulls coming from that farm, we really just can't account for that, and it's going to add some noise there and reduce the heritability of the trait. But still, a heritability of 0.4 is great and good to work with and very reasonable. So the next question is, performing genomic evaluations on this trait, how well can we identify which bulls will end up being high versus low producers, i.e., can we correctly identify which bulls will end up becoming large or small for scrotal circumference? So the results of which are on this slide. So we've got two figures here. The figure on the left represents when no scrotal circumference records were included on the 286 validation bulls. And the figure on the right is when we did include that first scrotal circumference record on those bulls when they entered our isolation facility. Each of the dots on each of these figures represents a single bull. So there's 286 dots on each of the figures. And the x-axis is the genetic merit for scrotal circumference resulting from the single-step genomic evaluation. And the y-axis is representing the average deviation of scrotal circumference from target growth. So, for example, if a bull is measured 3 times for scrotal circumference and he is consistently, let's say, 2 centimeters above target growth, then he'll end up on this y-axis at 2, for 2 above target. So again, the figure on the left is when we're not including any scrotal circumference records on these bulls, and these bulls have already been categorized phenotypically as small, average, or large. And the red dots are representing those phenotypically classified bulls that are being also correctly categorized based on their genomic evaluation. So there's a 41% of these 286 bulls are being correctly categorized based on what they actually end up turning out to be phenotypically for scrotal circumference. But of course, we're most interested in being able to properly identify large versus small scrotal circumference bulls, and 19% of those bulls were being correctly categorized using this genomic evaluation. So not wonderful degree of accuracy there, but when we do include that first scrotal circumference record on these bulls, we get the figure on the right, which shows that our accuracy with which we can properly identify the bulls that end up becoming large or small for scrotal circumference increases by about 24%, from 19% to 43%. So based on this slide, I would say that it's important to include that first scrotal circumference record when these bulls arrive at our facility, preferably after about 6 months of age, in order to be able to properly, or with a reasonable degree of accuracy, anticipate which bulls will end up actually phenotypically becoming large or small for scrotal circumference by the time they're ready to start producing semen at about 12 months of age. And that will allow us to subsequently determine which bulls, or predict which bulls, end up being better producers from having larger scrotal circumference and a better or greater sperm output. So based on all of the previous slides, essentially the conclusions that we can make or draw from these results is that within Semex, scrotal circumference is a reasonably moderate trait in terms of heritability. It's an important trait with respect to the efficiency with which our bulls produce semen, a good, meaningful difference in efficiency and profitability. And inclusion of that first scrotal circumference record will allow us to, with a reasonable degree of accuracy, predict which bulls will end up being good producers versus poor producers. And this can be used from various different standpoints. Coming from a background of genetic selection, my first thought is, well, we can use this for genetic selection, but it's a little bit more complicated than that when you're working in an industry type of position, because there's a lot of different factors. So we need to figure out scrotal circumference's relative importance to other traits that we really need to focus on as well, in order to be able to cater to the wide variety of market segments that we need to cater to. But it's also a good indicator of what bulls, because again, they arrive at our facility at a very young age, which bulls may need a little extra attention, because this is not a trait that is 100% dictated by genetics. So that's why we don't have a extremely high heritability for this trait. So with some extra attention and strategic management, these bulls could be, these bulls that end up being labeled as small for scrotal circumference, there could be some early intervention that goes on for these bulls. Yeah, with that, that's the end of my presentation. And at this point, I'm happy to entertain any questions that people might have.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Miller. I see Filippo has a question. Go ahead.
Very interesting presentation, Sarah. I'm wondering, you talked about these bulls, some are measured very early when they arrive at your place, and you haven't tried to look at correlation between an early measurement versus a later measurement. Okay, or did you try to analyze just the last measurement on the bulls, and instead of doing a random regression, just to see at the end the trait you want is when they are going to produce their semen, right? And I wonder if that maybe would be your target. I'm just trying to understand, because the variability you see may be that some bulls larger, and then they don't get as large later on when they're older. And the same for those that are very small, maybe they get much larger. So they have a lot of confounding there between the age of the balls in the development of the
So there is a lot of complication that went into the actual original phenotypic classification of bulls for scrotal circumference because of that. Realizing that the bulls, if there's only one scrotal circumference, and I'm hoping I'm answering your question correctly, stop me if I'm not. If there's only one scrotal circumference measure on a bull and it's, when they're very young, like before 6 months of age, I'm not going to classify them as large or small. So if there was only one scrotal circumference measure on a bull, it had to be after 10 months of age before I could classify it as large or small. So if it was larger than the target growth at that point, then it would be classified as large or small. If there was a lot of caveats and thresholds and criteria that had to be met for these bulls to be labeled as large or small, phenotypically speaking. If there was a reasonable degree of spread in their measurements of scrotal circumference, because there could be as many as 5 different measures within the first 12 months of their life. If the first record was showing to be large, but the rest of the records were average, he was not classified as large. But if the majority of his records were large relative to the target, and he was large toward the end of his stay at our isolation facility, then he was classified as large. I just didn't write down all the criteria because it was there was a lot that went into that.
Yeah, I was just thinking more as a trait of trait of evaluation, in which you only want to have a trait which is the one more indicator of the semen production, let's say. So you take that at 10 months of age, for example, you just evaluate that trait, very simple, one trait per animal, and then first of all to see what is the readability of the single observation, and then do an evaluation based on that. It doesn't matter to include the initial record or not, and you just use a genotype as genomic selection on that. And just thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely wouldn't want us to go down to only a single measure at like 4 months of age, for example. I would still want us to have to continue to measure the bulls on a regular basis, but in order to be able to have good representation of or good estimation of the SNP effects that are going into estimating the genomic evaluations of bulls when they arrive at our facility. So let's go through a scenario where a bull arrives at our facility at around 6 months of age. He gets a single scrotal circumference record. He is labeled genomically to have a potential to be a small scrotal circumference bull. I would still expect that our isolation group or our pre-production group would continue to measure the bull every, I think we do it every 2 weeks quite often, for scrotal circumference in order to continue having a good training set for estimation of SNP effects and continue to have a high or reasonable accuracy in this trait. But yeah, it's a good, at least that first record will lend us to be able to have some early identification and early intervention for these bulls. Realizing that intervention, I guess, if we're not recording that intervention, it could eventually cloud things a little. So it's something that we really need to keep our eyes on as well.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
And Flavio, go ahead.
Hi, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My question is related to what Filippo asked you. Mm-hmm. But I'm kind of I was surprised that you never adjusted for size or weight, right?
Yeah.
Because in beef cattle, most of genetic evaluation that I am aware for scrotal circumference, they adjust for both weight and age.
Yeah.
They are correlated, but they are not exactly the same. And so animal that's bigger tend to have a bigger scrotal circumference, but it doesn't mean that in terms of fertility, that animal will have a better fertility or even semen production. It's just because of the size, right?
Yeah.
It could be a big animal with a young age. So, so why you decide not adjusting for size or weight?
Admittedly, this was kind of a preliminary look at the trait, knowing that this is a subject that had come up. It's not always easy to find this data internally. I can take a look for it as well, but at the very least, I was looking to see any association between genomic evaluations for scrotal circumference with stature, with genomic evaluations for stature from the US on these bulls, and didn't find an association there at the very least. But yeah, with ongoing developments in this trait, in this evaluation, if I can find the body weight information, and I don't know that we actually record it on a regular basis, though we may record it or have information on it when they arrive at our isolation facility, that's something that can be included as well to hopefully improve
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I wonder if when you look at the goodness of your predictions, if you had adjusted your phenotypic data,
No.
also by weight or size, if you would not get better predictions.
Yeah.
Or
Yep,
even
that's
when you
something
are
I should definitely.
even when you are predicting, right, in the model adjusting. But it's just something that called my attention because of I worked with this trait years ago when I was involved with the genetic evaluation of beef breeds.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I definitely need to be looking into. It's something that wasn't really initially looked into. There was a lot of skepticism internally as to the usefulness of the trait, at the very least. The trait is measured. We have a great pre-production team that work from the isolation facility that we're very proactive in making sure that they record it on a regular basis. But initially, scrotal circumference was merely used as, along with other physical traits, in conjunction in order to evaluate our bulls physically to ensure that they're in top physical condition before, so that they're ready, so that we know that they're ready for semen production at 12 months of age. And beyond that, it wasn't being used for anything, and people were skeptical as to how useful it would be in a genomic evaluation. So this is kind of a first step, and for sure, if I can find that body weight data, it would be great to include in here as well.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sarah.
Thanks.
Good work. Thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you.
And there is a question in the chat. I think it's similar to Flavio's question, but I can read it anyways. This might not apply to dairy cattle, but in Angus, if we plot scrotal circumference and I'm assuming yearling weight, it's a straight line. Scrotal circumference is a function of growth and yearling weight, and we have a approximately 0 correlation between fertility factors like semen motility and scrotal circumference. So do you think that semen production is a function of animal growth and not scrotal circumference?
Sorry, do I think semen production is a factor of animal growth and not scrotal circumference? Is that the gist of it?
Yes.
Again, I was looking just for a quick look because a lot of research in this industry has to be performed quickly because we have a lot of different research projects on the go. So after performing this analysis what I had done just to quickly kind of check to see what the association with body size would be is looking at the correlation with body stature genetic evaluations coming out of national evaluations, and I wasn't finding a statistical difference between bulls that were being evaluated to be large for scrotal circumference relative to bulls that were being evaluated as being small for scrotal circumference. So just based on that, I'm not too sure about that, but I do know that colloquially speaking, the pre-production team have told me, that a bull will look to be smaller than he ought for scrotal circumference based on his size. So there's definitely variability within body size with respect to scrotal circumference.
Okay, and another chat question from Christine. How did the standard errors look with regards to your heritability estimate for scrotal circumference?
Don't have that available off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
And I was wondering too, did you or are you planning to look into kind of the relationship with the fertility of the daughters? I was wondering how much of the trait is kind of determined by the Y chromosome, or if maybe the daughters can have an increase in fertility as well.
Yeah, I haven't found, in an initial, again, quick check, I hadn't found any association. I was also looking to see if some daughters had earlier onset of puberty, because I had read in various literature studies that greater scrotal circumference is associated with earlier onset. Sorry, let me know when you can hear me. I've got some Windows security alert.
Oh, you're good now.
That I can't seem to get rid of, and I'm sure you can see it on my screen. But anyways, sorry. So I had found that from the literature that daughters of bulls with larger scrotal circumference tend to have earlier onset to puberty. And in the US, there is a trait called early first calving, I believe, that I was trying to associate with this trait. I really need to take another look at it again, but I wasn't finding any association with that either. Again, maybe we need to work into the analysis, the body weight, in order to account for that, to get a better association, because I would have anticipated that these bulls would have daughters that had an analysis for early first calving that's indicative of early onset to puberty, but I wasn't seeing it.
Interesting. And then I was also wondering, how is the trait measured exactly? Is it just like a quick measuring tape, or is there any way to kind of standardize it so it's a little less kind of variable between people?
Yeah, so we've tried various different things, but they ended up settling on the reliable tape. So, it sounds like the word reliable, but it's spelled with a B-U-L-L at the end to be cute. So I think that's quite a popular one to do. The problem is that, and I've never measured scrotal circumference in bulls, so this is me speaking based on what I heard is difficult about it, that they really have to work to palpate the testes down into the scrotal sac for these young bulls, and that's not really a problem for the older bulls. And if it is giving somebody a problem when they're trying to take this measure, it can result in some variability that isn't typically seen in older bulls. So it's really, I'm not sure if there's a full solution for that. I don't know. I haven't been able to find any groups that have looked at measuring scrotal circumference in very young bulls that have suggested ways of doing it better, or methods that increase the consistency with which people can measure that trait in such young bulls.
Does anyone have any last questions? I don't see any chat or hands up. All right, if not, can wrap it up, I guess. Thank you for everyone that joined us today, and thank you, Dr. Miller, for the great presentation. This is the last CGIL seminar of the winter semester, so I'll be looking forward to seeing everyone in the fall semester, and hope everyone has a nice summer. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's you know, it's been a long time, and it went smoothly, and I was very nervous, but yeah, it was fun. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you
for listening. Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good summer, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.